Oh, you know what that sound means, ladies and gentlemen. We are back. Part two of our World War One extravaganza. Thank you for joining us. With me, as always, to my left, I couldn't do it without this guy. He's the Hannon to my Barbera. He's the Morph to my Wolverine. It's a little X-Men reference. He's the Stallone to my Apollo Creed. Or the Rocky to my Apollo Creed. The Stallone to my Weathers. It's Professor Adam.
Hello, everyone. I was just thinking about how sometimes we mix up the bells. And I was thinking an air raid siren would work, but then I remembered that air raid sirens probably weren't around because we just invented airplanes.
That's true.
So that probably wouldn't have mattered.
That's a good connection. Good job on that. Yeah, this is part two. If you're listening to this, hopefully you've listened to part one so you know where we are at. If you're joining in straight on part two, ballsy for you, but we're gonna do our best here. Kind of in the previous episode, we discussed all the players in the game, the early parts of World War One. We're about 2 years in at this point, and we just ended essentially, 2 years in, and there's already other countries still joining the fight, which is different than World War II, where it seems to be like just the established nations from the first go. America did sit back a little bit until Pearl Harbor, just like in World War One, and we're about ready to get to that here in just a few minutes. But yeah, I mean, we're still getting new players on the board. People are seeing opportunity for land that they can grab up and shit, and they're fucking throwing themselves whole hog into the fray.
There's a wild scene where the Allies get like 6 different countries, just all within like a matter of 2
Exactly.
weeks.
People see the writing on the wall, they're like, "Oh, we can get our beaks wet on that." Yeah. So not a lot else to say on this intro. We're gonna go ahead and get right out and into the nitty gritty and take you for part two of World War One. Previously on Historically High, the Bulgarians have just joined the war on the side of the Central Powers and have attacked and pretty much fucking taken Serbia off the board. Caused enough casualties out of their already very small 4.5 million population. And at this point, Serbia is just kind of it's a token ally. It's not going to do anything. It can't contribute anything, unfortunately. But I mean, at this point, too, I don't know if this is good news. We do have a number of allied troops from both like Britain and France that have just recently landed in Greece to try to kind of, I guess, stem the bleeding.
Yeah. They also said that the rest of the allied troops, or the rest of the Serbs that were in Serbia, were able to escape. They made it down to Greece, so they still maintained a little bit of a Serbian force, but they're not fighting at home anymore. It's all away games for Serbia at this point.
Well, we come to December 8th of 1915, and we mentioned it in part one, but this is actually the end of the Gallipoli campaign. So, I mean, this thing, despite the disaster it's been, it was not cut short. Finally, they decided that they needed to go ahead and evacuate after both sides lost 250,000 casualties. With these numbers, and here's the thing about World War One, because artillery was used to such a high degree, so many bodies were pretty much like destroyed and blown apart to where identifying bodies and numbers and everything it's kind of difficult.
This had to be the invention of dog tags, right?
They called them ID discs or something because they were like circular or something like that. I can't remember what exactly they called them. But at the same time, like, No Man's Land has all the mud, stuff's getting buried. There's not really a lot of people that aren't outside of a combat capacity or fighting capacity that are going down there from an administrative standpoint trying to count casualties. I think they pretty much just know how many guys they send out, and how many guys end up coming back, and then just have to make the assumption based on that. But
Well,
250,000.
yeah, there's spots in the Eastern Front that they said they're still finding bodies. I think the last time they found bodies from World War One was like 2015.
Kind of jumping back to trench warfare a little bit. So much ammunition during some of these battles, in the trenches and everything, was fired that there are still places where there's unexploded ordnance everywhere within these places. There was a time frame when farmers were trying to farm this land, and they're not getting blown up or anything like that, but they were hitting these shells just so frequently that they considered, I think they called it, they were iron farming.
Yeah, because at that point, after so many years, your powder has been what's the word? Not diffused, but it's just finally lost
Yeah, and
its.
chances are, if it was a dud,
Yeah.
then whatever's gonna, unless hitting it fucking with a sledgehammer
Yeah.
or something like that. Also, with trench warfare, like you were saying, with so many casualties and everything from identification. One story I remember, I forgot to mention in part one about trench warfare, is in a section of the trenches on the British side. They had someone that, when they were digging the trench, I don't know if the guy had been killed, but during exposure of the trench, his arm was sticking out. So there was just an arm sticking out. And it got to the point where, man, you just probably have to have a desensitized, morbid sense of humor to even cope or try to process and get through this stuff. Before they would go over the wire, they would shake hands and they call it Jack or something like that. And so everyone would shake hands, and then it got to be like a tradition where, like, oh shit, I didn't shake Jack's hand, it's gonna be bad luck, I'm not gonna be making it back. But it's just like, that's crazy to fucking think about. There's just some dead body's arm hanging out, and they're just like, Jack.
Hey, I'm not gonna judge these guys for how they had to get through war. I would never survive in anything like this. If shaking a dead guy's hand sticking out of the ground is what you need, do it.
So, getting back to Gallipoli, so they end up evacuating 83,000 troops, Allied troops, from Gallipoli.
Like in the dead of night, they said they didn't lose one person during the evacuation.
Yeah.
That's insane.
Well, think of it like, the way I tried to think about it in my head is kind of compared it to Dunkirk.
Yeah.
But with Dunkirk, you have, and we're going to get to this in a few minutes, you have the Germans with tanks. You also have the Germans with aircraft. And the big thing with Dunkirk is you had the dive bombers coming in. They were able to hit the ships that were trying to load the soldiers on. Where you don't have planes in that regard, you're probably able to evacuate troops a little bit easier. But still, at that point, that also far away Gallipoli at the fucking other end of the Mediterranean to try to get those people out. I mean, that's still insanely impressive.
Yeah, you're probably not pulling up onto shore. You're pulling up as far as you think the artillery can fly and then loading the boats from there.
Mm-hmm. So we get into 1916, and this essentially kind of saw a stalemate, basically due to food shortages with the blockades. It was like England blockading Germany, and then farther out with the U-boats, Germany blockading England. And so
it was working.
Oh, yeah.
It was working very effectively. These were two very important forms to kind of drive the other one nuts. And at that point, it's sort of a race of who can outlast the other one.
And here's the thing, too, is with Britain, it's an island.
Yeah.
And they got dangerously close to the point where they were running out of supplies. I think at one point they got down to a 35-day supply of food.
Jesus
Where had
Christ.
they not received supplies, they would have been out of resources in those 35 days. I mean, it comes that fucking razor close to a loss. Yeah, and this entire thing goes a different direction. The other thing, too, is things tend to be going one way on one front and then another way on another front, because in early January, the Russians, they actually begin making some inroads against the Ottomans. They're not doing too great against the Germans, but because they have that huge front, they're fighting, a giant front against multiple enemies, basically.
And just as well as that's going, we start to see something that's going to be a pretty fascinating episode. But the Germans begin the assault on Verdun, February 21st, 1916. This Verdun, is that Verdun?
Verdun, I think.
Okay. Verdun is an extremely just bloody, it's a rock fight, basically, with just how it all goes down. The Brits are starting to run low. The British are actually the last country to use conscription in the war. So this is now where the Brits, I think they said the only two reasons, it was a conscientious objector, the only two reasons that you didn't get conscripted were because of religious beliefs or because there was something else. I don't remember if it was like a personal stance or something like that, but...
Conscientious objector type thing.
Yeah, I think that's what they were. I don't know how much of that you would get, though. I'm sure that there was, and I'm sure there's numbers out there.
You're fighting for the survival at this point,
Yeah.
where you see how bad it is back home with rationing and things like that. At that point, that is where your patriotism then makes you go into that. If you're on the fence and conscription is the thing, and I'm not saying that I agree with it ever needing to get to that point or anything like that. It's horrible to be told if you don't want to fight that you're having to go ahead and fight, especially a war that you didn't start. You're just trying to survive at this point. But if that's what you're on the fence about it or anything like that, and conscription comes along, maybe you're just like, okay, I guess this is what puts me into this situation.
At least I have a chance at not dying and winning.
And it was survival at this point.
Yeah.
The Battle of Verdun that Adam had mentioned ends up being the longest battle of World War I. It spans from February 21st all the way to December 18th.
Longest, but not the bloodiest? I believe the bloodiest will be the Somme that we're going to be talking about soon. Yeah.
During the Battle of Verdun, and it will get its own episode because it takes so long. There's so many engagements during it. Just to give you a taster, 700,000 plus casualties, and ends up in what I guess you could consider a French win. Basically, Verdun isn't just one specific location, but an area. And this is kind of the battle that lets the world know and kind of opens people's eyes to knowing that this previously established way of warfare of defensive forts and things like that that are stationary are no longer going to be the status quo for war if it takes place in the future. It's all about mobilization and movement and trying to, outmaneuver and having a fort. That used to be great in the Middle Ages where you would establish a fortification and just be able to defend it from there. And it does. That is exactly why the Battle of Verdun ends up taking a positive side for the French, but it still is at a huge loss.
Static wars are extinct. And this is kind of the asteroid that causes it.
Yeah, and it gets so bad, in fact, that basically to take the pressure off the French forces in Verdun, Russia's just like, all right, fuck it. So they basically charge headlong into the Germans, and basically during this offensive, fell to the tone of 100,000 casualties to only 20,000 on the German side. A five-fold fucking difference.
Not great. Not great at all.
What does Russia have the most? What is their chief export?
Guys.
Yes.
They're just out there shoveling more in.
164 million population is really starting to come in handy at this point.
And Britain at this juncture kind of has to take a little time off because we have something on April 24th called the Easter Rising Revolt in Ireland. The Brits kind of have to look that way. In 6 days, I believe they shut down the revolt. But again, we're just laying seeds for Ireland's independence because that's going to be a fucking episode in and of itself. It's going to be great. But this kind of shows that while these forces are out fighting, and maybe this will be the theme of the ending of this episode and kind of towards the end, while you're out at war, you're vulnerable at home. So there will be revolution that goes on at home while you have all of your soldiers out trying to fight to keep this thing together.
And it's not like it's just like, oh, they're gone, let's create a revolution. These are long-standing groups within these countries, like in Russia, like in Ireland, that have grievances against these countries that are essentially ruling them against their wills. And when they see weakness or they see themselves in an advantageous position to maybe seek independence, they've been waiting so long that they don't really give a fuck what's going on in the rest of the world, that this is their priority at that point. I want to say it was like March 1st, basically Germany gets to the point too where this blockade is wearing on them so much that they go back to unrestricted submarine warfare. So it's like that scene on The Office where Dwight is reshunning and unshunning. Yeah. That's basically what they do during this entire war with this unrestricted warfare. They'll like unrestricted, restricted, unrestricted, restricted. So at this point, when they're getting a little bit desperate, it's back on. So civilian vessels, merchant vessels, at this point, they're not safe because the Brits have come so close to essentially being starved of resources. They have to change the way that they're receiving these supplies. And where you get kind of in World War II, you get the escort convoys. That's just a thing that happens from the get go. In World War II, there's never a time where it's just like all our warships are dedicated to fighting the war. All you merchant vessels trying to bring supplies over, you're all on your fucking own. They learn their lesson from this war, and they basically allocate a section of the Navy to escort these giant convoys of merchant ships to essentially repel U-boat attacks.
Yeah.
This is where you get the invention of the depth charge. They are trying to find out methods of battling these U-boats, and the depth charge ends up being the one that they come up with. And again, that carries over into World War II.
Probably one of the biggest things that we're seeing right now as, oh, maybe sort of a side effect of World War One was Britain convinces the Arab state to revolt against the Ottomans, and the whole thought process was to bring the Arab state in, you need to offer them something. And basically what Britain says is, hey, if you guys want to join in, we're going to give you spoils. The area around Gaza, very popular right now, Palestine, those areas will be yours if you want to get in here. And at the same time they're doing that, they are talking to other allies saying, well, we'll promise Arabia them or those areas that they can take, but we're just going to kind of cut it up as we see fit, and we'll give them what we have left.
They're double dealing.
Yeah, they're doing what they have to get it done. Unfortunately, we're seeing the consequences and have seen the consequences ever since the end of this war. But that revolt, the Arab revolt, was led by our boy, the badass motherfucker Lawrence of Arabia. That guy,
The most unassuming white boy. Wearing turban and fucking a white fucking desert robes and all that shit.
up until Chris did the episode on him and we all learned about him, didn't know he was a white guy.
So he's over there. He essentially comes out of the British office in Egypt and is sent over kind of as an envoy to, I believe it's one of the like Sultan, the guy that's in charge, one of his sons,
Yeah.
to kind of be his envoy and to kind of advise him on how best to go ahead and basically fight this revolt. Go back and listen to the episode. The war
Great
that they
episode.
wage against the Ottomans in the desert is just fucking awesome. It's hit and run tactics. It's desert warfare. It's fucking awesome. It's sabotage. It's everything you want it to be. Kind of getting back out to the ocean and the war at sea, we get to the Battle of Jutland on May 16th. So prior to the Battle of Jutland, about 6 days prior, like I was mentioning before, Germany's back like, okay, we're going back to restricted warfare. So apparently something may have happened where the United States, because again, they're still under here, might have chimed in and been like, hey, we see you doing this shit again, knock it off. They're like, oh, sorry, I thought I pressed the button. I didn't mean to press the button to hit unrestricted. I thought we were still locked into restricted warfare. So we get to the Battle of Jutland, and this is the only major naval battle of the entirety of World War One. You get the battles that Adam was talking about in part one, where you get the engagement down off of South America. You get fleets that are attacking each other in smaller scale, or like just ships being, taken out by shore batteries. This is essentially a big one. This is the British having 28 battleships, 9 battle cruisers, 26 light cruisers, and 79 destroyers.
Good Lord, that's a lot of ships.
And just to kind of provide a brief overview of kind of the differences in the ships, this is the invention. The British invent essentially what the battleship is. It's a dreadnought battleship. Basically, it's what we know as the prototypical battleship in World War II. The biggest fucking guns you can put on this, a lot of armor. Battle cruisers are essentially kind of the slightly smaller brother to battleships. They're more meant for speed, but kind of have the same armaments as far as like guns, but less armor because they think that their speed will require them to have less armor. They're trying to have kind of a mix of these different types of ships because if the Germans crack the code on how to defeat strictly the battleships, they don't want all their eggs in one basket. And of course, they're much more expensive and much more resource consuming to produce these larger ships. Light cruisers, again, smaller armaments, lighter, and then destroyers are basically the small ones that really can't stand up to any of the other ships, but are good for support roles. basically to just kind of harass other ships. They can also launch torpedoes, I believe.
Well, that the Germans, hopefully I'm not wrong about this, the Germans like to fat ass on their ship. They like to slap that thing and watch it jiggle. That was sort of their idea, was bigger is better.
Yep.
So you don't have the same maneuvering capabilities that this full armada, if you will, of British ships can do.
What we basically have to do, because we don't have as many ships and we can't manufacture as many, we have to make they prioritize survivability of these ships over maybe speed or maneuverability. They prioritize essentially being able to absorb a bunch of punishment because they had more ships going after them. But if they were able to survive and have larger armaments, they could then dish out the punishments to these ships who would be more easily taken out of action. So a different, essentially, doctrine about naval warfare there.
And we figure out which doctrine wins out.
So on the German side, we have 16 battleships, 6 what they consider pre-dreadnought battleships, so those are just slightly smaller, less armored versions, 5 battle cruisers, and 61 destroyers. So each side has roughly around, with the Brits, you have more than 100 ships, like 150 or so. And then with the Germans, you have probably closer to maybe a little less than 100. And this battle is actually going to take place, as it says, Jutland. It's actually kind of in between, and I'm trying to remember the name of the sea, but it's kind of not
It's the North Sea, isn't it?
The North Sea. It's what's basically between Norway and Britain in that area. So not a huge area.
No.
And basically how this thing goes is the Brits were able to actually crack the German naval code. They were already using codes at this point, but they weren't super sophisticated. So the Brits, as they do in World War II, they cracked the naval code and are able to determine that the Germans are trying to basically pull out only a portion of the British fleet, use their side or use their advantage in numbers over that smaller portion of the fleet to beat them, and then be somewhere closer to par with the rest of the British fleet. Well, the Brits figure out this idea, so they're like, okay, they want to just draw out a partial fleet and try to attack them. That's fine. That's what we'll give them. So they send out essentially a smaller portion of the fleet, some of the smaller ships,
Yeah.
and basically end up running into this German fleet. Well, after they end up running into the German fleet inflicts some pretty decent losses almost right away. I think they end up sinking 3 of the British ships within the course of like the first 10 or 15 minutes at the loss of 1 German ship.
Probably some of the smaller ones.
I think it was actually 1 battle cruiser, but then a couple smaller ones. Well, as they're moving into position to fight, the rest of the British fleet is essentially kind of just over the horizon a little bit
Just
and
waiting.
basically starts steaming towards them and catches them in this naval move called crossing the T.
Ooh.
And crossing the T is basically, if you imagine the letter T.
Upper or lowercase?
Uppercase.
Okay.
You have the German fleet, which is heading in straight in the line of the stem of the T, and the British are the top of the T, all facing broadside. Now, with ships, if you are steaming straight ahead, the only guns you are able to fire are those forward-facing guns. Completely takes your rear guns out, and a lot of these ships only had 1 to maybe 2 sets of guns on the front. If you are at the top of the T and you're crossing it, you have all your ships broadside, all of your guns are available pointing in one direction, so you're able to sling a ton more armament and artillery at this. So they basically draw the Germans into this and basically unload on them with the rest of the fleet. The Germans don't take a ton of losses as far as the ships go. There's a lot of ship damage, but most of their ships are able to make it back. From a strictly material standpoint of loss, the Germans actually won the battle because they sunk more ships and they cost the British Navy more sailors. On the other side of it, the engagement did cause enough damage and casualties on the German side to where it scared the Kaiser, and he was like, we need to pull, we can't send them out like that again, we got to pull them in back for defense. So basically pulls all of the ships back to Germany or friendly German waters, and that's where the Navy for Germany stays for the remainder of the war. So although they weren't inflicted as much damage as the Brits, it basically sent the message that's like, oh fuck, I think we're a little bit out of our depth, and I think we may have gotten lucky here. We can't afford to lose these ships.
They broke their naval spirit.
Mm-hmm. In the first major engagement, it didn't go their way, and they probably were just questioning, how did they fucking know? Because they obviously knew it was a trap.
Uh-huh.
And the simple fact that they didn't know how they were pulled into a trap probably let them know that this could have happened. This could happen again very easily.
As a betting man, there's no way that you could ever you would just take my money if you were like, how many naval wars or battles do you think happened during World War One? Like, I would have said 50.
Oh yeah,
because it makes so much more sense because boats were so much more readily available that I mean that just blew me away when I found out that that was like the only actual naval engagement.
they're traveling so much. Like there's so much water involved.
Yeah.
They're having to travel to all these locations via shipping and everything. They're having to bring in all these supplies via shipping. You think that it would be much more often that these enemy fucking fleets were running into each other.
Yeah, dude. So nuts.
Well, and I guess it doesn't help that maybe because one got scared and came back, if Germany decided to come back out again, they would have had more fights.
Maybe. I do think that Germany saw the U-boats maybe as what was working on the high seas and didn't think that maybe full-on, full-scale
The
warfare.
cost-benefit analysis was much more in the favor of the U-boat.
Speaking of that, very odd. They said that one of the ways that they would lose U-boats would be when they would dive down. If there was some sort of leak in the batteries, there would be a noxious gas that would then fill up the submarine and kill them. So they would just dive down and there would be some issue and some problem and they couldn't get up fast enough to get oxygen. So by the time it got to the surface, it was just a submarine full of dead people.
And they would just come along and find.
Yeah.
And then just be able to ventilate it, go down, steal all the shit that was all in fucking good condition, all the code books and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I would say probably second. Pilots first for craziest. Second would have to be guys in the submarine.
Hands down.
And then third, guys on the front line rushing into no man's land.
Yeah.
But in that order, I think.
Yeah. So we come to the summer of 1916.
Yes.
So 1916, we come to the summer. We get the summer offensive started by the Russians. What did they end up like? What was the point of their offensive on that one?
They knew that Verdun still needed some help. This was kind of like one of their last ditch, like we have to really try to do something. I'm sure it was Nicholas trying to get some wins pretty quick. And it was just, they knew that they needed to pull pressure because what we needed as the Allies was to try to break this stalemate on the Western Front. The Western Front was so dug in. Verdun was still getting just attacked and gone after. And we'll get to the number at the end of Verdun here coming up. The number of casualties, I think you already mentioned in total. The number just blows me away, but at the same time, we still have the Somme to talk about. And the Somme takes part on the Western Front.
You just reminded me. So I think the summer offensive that the Russians did is they attacked further down the line, and I think they attacked the Ottomans. Or not the Ottomans, the Austrian.
Okay.
And so they were able to essentially, because that was the weaker part of that line, they started making some inroads, and that actually forced the Germans to divert some resources from the Western Front to actually shore up and assist the Austria-Hungarians.
The Russians know that they're not there for tactical victories. They're there to try to take as much or as many resources from the Western Front as possible.
The Russians kind of strike me as like a World War Z situation.
Yeah.
Where it's just
Zombies.
a mass of human. It's just we're trying to throw so much meat at you that you'll finally just collapse under the weight of all the corpses we're making. Also
crazy, and maybe it was the revolution that happens, but how do you not find yourself in a better state when this happens the second time in World War II? You're still just the same strategy?
I think because of the revolution, there's no uniformity in the country.
Yeah.
There's not enough time to like standardize anything or like
True.
You just get into power and then what are you supposed to do? Your priority is to make sure you're taking over all aspects of the government, not building up and ready for another war.
The fact that there's still the dude supplier in World War II after losing this many people.
You stick to what you're good at.
Yeah, but to be able to have that much population at the beginning or to be able to repopulate fast enough in that time to have more people to go out, like how? How are you just that supplier?
It's like that meme from Starship Troopers where they're like, I'm doing my part. And it's American. He's like, I'm doing my part for the Brits. And it's just Russian. He's like, we're doing our part. I'm just fucking tired of shit. Well, we come on July 1st to the Battle of the Somme. And this is, I think, pretty much this is the battle.
Yeah.
I think of World War I. This would be, I think, kind of what people would be considered, maybe Stalingrad for World War II, maybe the Battle of the Bulge. Just that, just that well known. It was so much shit happened during this battle. The numbers were so insane that it just stands out above everything else.
Yeah, to the tune of day one, the British lose 57,000 casualties in day one.
Now you're probably like, well, you guys just talked about how the French lost 27 in the last episode, 27,000. Again, this is 57,000 casualties, so either killed or wounded to where they weren't able to fight. The number, though, of killed on that was very high. It was a little less than half.
Good God, that is so many people. And again, another inference that you would make would be 57,000 casualties is going to be a quick war. This shit went on for 5 months still.
Mm-hmm.
So after we see 57,000 on day one, they're like, well, let's go do this for 4 months and 29 more days.
Oh, so I'll correct myself because I just saw the note. So yeah, 57,000 casualties. I think they said it was in the matter of not just 3 hours, but over the course of just a few hours. It was 1/3 of those guys were killed. So that's still close to almost 20,000.
Yeah, that's a hell of a lot.
But I mean, just even thrown out, and we don't want to go into this one, even though it's so fucking interesting. It's meaty as shit. It's going to get its own episode just because of everything that happens over the course of those 5 months. Just to whet your beak, so you're looking forward to that episode. The casualties on the British side over the course of that 5 months during the battle, 420,000 casualties. Well, you're like, well, that doesn't sound like so much compared to the first day losing 57,000. Yeah, you lose 57,000 the first day, and you don't keep doing the same shit every other day.
Yeah, you change
up your
course.
tactics. Yeah, exactly. But still, when all's said and done, the Brits lose 420,000, the French lose 200,000, and the Germans 440,000.
Yeah.
A million fucking casualties. A million.
Yeah. I mean, that's got to be the bloodiest engagement of just engagements ever, right? There's no way that there was that many more people lost than anything else.
So, just from a perspective of time during this, 5 months, a million casualties, that's literally just on a daily basis, thousands of casualties per day. And in this area, and it's not just one town called Somme, it's the area it's closest to. So the battlefront is spread out quite a bit. But this is the first time in the advent of field hospitals. This wasn't a World War II scenario where it was you get shot and you're like, medic. This was the first advent of maybe stretcher bearers that could just come out and grab you. Maybe you'd be laying out there in a pile of corpses for hours, wounded. You'd probably bleed out before anyone had a chance to fucking do anything for you.
Yeah, there wasn't a whole lot of making it back to camp.
No, but also during battles like this of this scale, this is literally when they're setting up thousands, hundreds, if not thousands of pieces of artillery back on these lines, and then just launching. There were some of these battles where they literally dropped over 1 million shells of these weapons, and just the sheer number and the sheer destruction. How does any place ever recover from something like that?
I was looking at pictures of a couple of the places, and I think we'll talk about this with Verdun and how it ends up. But it's literally just craters and mud pits. And it's where actual places stood that it's unrecognizable. It just looks like, if you're looking at it, it just looks like somebody took a giant shotgun and just shot a big old mud puddle.
You're destroying the landscape beyond where no one will ever come back.
Yeah, and nothing will grow on it. It's just done. We need to just cordon that area off, and if it ever comes back, we'll be shocked. And all the humans in there will be the fertilizer to then have anything else grow out of it.
So, despite everyone fucking dying during this, over 1 million casualties, you still get other countries that are just like, hey.
Yeah, who's throwing in?
Yeah, who's next? So Romania enters the war for the Allies on August 27th and basically attacks to draw some attention from the troops from Bulgaria.
Yeah, as soon as they go into Austro-Hungary or Hungary, Bulgaria is like, whoa, shit, we got to go protect these guys. We protected them against the Serbs. They're pretty much washed out, so let's get up there and try to protect them. And you're just seeing, I would say at this point in time, Romania has to have a set on them because the Allies aren't in control of this battle. The Allies aren't in control of the war at all.
And here's the thing, how would you even really know? Because your information, a battle could be won in a day. If something goes wrong, a battle could completely go the other direction within the matter of a day. So information that you have is probably not all that up to date. And when you're Romania, I mean, I don't know if Romania had a monarch or anything like that, but do you just have a guy daily that you're just like, what is the status of the war?
Mm-hmm.
Who's winning? And he's like, well, today, sir, I believe it is the Allies. Oh, excellent. We should join on the side of the Allies.
You got to choose the right day. And luckily, I think maybe Romania just chose the right day. They followed the right report. Germans push on Verdun ends August 29th. Like you said, 365,000 French casualties, 336,000 German casualties. And this brings PVH, Paul von Hindenburg, and Erich Ludendorff west. They get pulled off of the Eastern Front. That seems like it's pretty much in their hands. They can do whatever they want with Russia, but you need PVH's brain over on this Western Front to be able to figure out. You just threw basically your best punch at Verdun, and you couldn't take Verdun. Mm-hmm. So you have to figure out a different strategy, and PVH was that guy.
Well, at this point, too, when you've invested all of this time and resources, casualties, and everything, at that point, when you're looking at that and you're the commander of the military, are you just like, if I don't take this and I don't keep trying this and we don't make this a success, I'm probably dead. Because I can't go back and basically be like, oh yeah, I did lose this many guys. Okay, so we took the city then, or we took the fort. I mean, we got some good shots in. They got some good shots in.
Less or more, either way.
Big development in warfare, kind of a fucking something that's going to shape warfare going forward from then up to the future now.
Fun story how it got its name.
What?
The tank?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So, September 15th, the British used the armored tank for the first time in history. And with tanks being a new invention for World War I, they're designed because of a necessity.
Mm-hmm.
And the necessity here was, we got to break these trench lines. We got to figure out some way to navigate no man's land to go ahead and force the Germans to move back because our current fucking tactics aren't working.
Germans had some good barbed wire too, they said.
Oh, yeah.
It was very, very tough to penetrate.
So, if anyone has seen Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, the tank that the Germans are using when they're trying to get to the Canyon of the Crescent Moon to find like the Holy Grail and everything that Indy ends up fighting the Nazi in, that's actually a British tank. So...
Ooh.
Yeah.
Was that a mistake?
I don't know. I think the tank, they were just looking for a World War I tank. And
didn't
that
care
was
which
kind of
side.
The only one. And it's not to think that, the Germans probably did get their hands on quite a few of these that had broken down and then they took and tried to start developing. I mean, in World War II, that was their big thing, was they had the most superior tanks.
True.
These tanks aren't like your traditional tanks that you're thinking of with like a turret on top and the gun that's able to swivel. These first tanks were essentially created to storm these trenches. So they were also designed to be so wide that they were able to drive over the trench, and by the time it got halfway, the way it was shaped, do you remember how, I'm going to try to describe it a little bit. It was almost, if you're looking at it from the side, it's almost shaped like a trapezoid.
Yes.
Where you had the two lines, and then the front was angled going from the bottom up, and then the back. So by the time it got to the halfway point and the tank started to tip, the front of it that juts out is already laying over the thing, and if it tips down, those tracks will then grab it and
get a
pull it back
foothold,
over, and it was able to just drive over the trenches. They said that there are stories of essentially these tanks taking the battlefield, and the Germans were in the trenches, and these things rolled over, and it didn't kill them.
Yeah.
It literally, and they're just looking at the underside of this thing that they have never fucking seen, this mechanized fucking beast that's got these fucking dual swivel cannons out to each side that were just firing shit. And think of if you are in there, you got two gunners, one on each side with these giant swivel cannons. You got probably a machine gunner in front. You got the driver. you get over the top of one of these trenches and you just put the thing in park. You have those two guns aimed down the sides of the trenches, and you just start fucking firing.
At the same time, you get the feeling of the roller coaster when you feel that tipping point, and you just pray to God that
You're far enough onto the other side to hit that, because if you get stuck, all their fucking artillery's coming down on you.
They're gonna pull you out, and it ain't gonna be pretty what happens.
The Germans did have, I think they had a couple models of tank. One of the ones that stands out to me is it wasn't built with the intention like the British one for like storming the fields and getting over there. Theirs were more, it looked like an armored van that was on tracks, where it was like almost a giant like crab shell on top of it, but the thing was literally like a fucking hedgehog, and it had like two machine guns out one side, one out the front, one out the back, and two at the others, to where it was just a rolling fucking death dome.
Rolling pillbox.
Yeah, exactly. The French, I want to say their tank, they had several others. The British had several others, but they also had almost like a little single-seater tank that was just small, had a little rotating turret up top, and would be driven by one guy in the front and then one guy that was working the turret.
Yeah.
I think all countries had a couple different variants, but those were kind of the main ones that stand out to me. But, I mean, being a new invention, they, I think, ended up having, at the beginning, when they first put them into combat, 43 of them. Like, 10 or 15 of them were destroyed. A few of them broke down because they were new technology. They were pretty unreliable as far as breakdowns and everything like that. So you basically had to have a mechanic riding with you in the tank, or someone that could fix shit when it broke down.
Just continuously fixing it as things are going wrong.
But I think Churchill was back in control, or not control, but he was back in government at this point. And as soon as they saw what these tanks could actually do when they were functioning, they ordered 1,000 more.
When we see his creativity that he gets with his tanks that he creates for storming Normandy.
I'm trying to think what he called them, land boat or something
like
that.
Yeah, that's what it was.
Land boats.
Which, pretty cool. This whole project was done under such a veil of secrecy that the people actually building it were told that they were to carry water. And once they realized that they weren't just to carry water and they were to go out on the fields and be killing machines, they just kept the name of tank. So tanks are named after water tanks that they were believed to be known to be.
I had no fucking clue.
Yeah.
You just blew my mind, man.
Yeah, dude, just a crazy way to be like, well, I mean, technically they're still tanks. They're not carrying water. They're just carrying people.
Yeah. That's fucking nuts.
So, yeah, the first battle that they're used on, it was a battle called the Battle of Flers, and it was September 15th. All the tanks failed. Yeah. every single one of them just didn't make it.
But they saw what the potential was in it, and essentially they did more even in failure during this, and they were also in a smaller number.
Yeah.
That they weren't able to accomplish mission, but they were just like, oh shit, I mean, we made a lot more progress than we had in any other option. I think if we have a shit ton more of these things, we can actually get this thing done.
Yeah.
So start fucking building more.
Yeah, 5 failed, but could 50 fail? Mm-hmm. Like, there's no way. The Eastern Offensive kind of comes to an inauspicious end. We're coming up on it. They believe that the casualties on the ending of the last, like, Russian offensive, I don't know if you would call it the end, because there's still a few more battles, so maybe I'm getting ahead of myself.
As it's winding down.
Yeah, as it's winding down, this last offensive, the last real big push that they give, they ended up losing about 1 million Russians compared to about 1.4 million Austro-Hungarians. So we're talking about 2.4 million for an offensive. I mean, this wasn't just a battle, so it lasted a long time.
It's a campaign.
Yeah, that's a lot of people to die.
But someone can afford to lose that many people. Others can't afford to lose that many.
No, yeah, I mean, the Russians, 1 million hurts, but goddamn, 1.4 million has to do a lot more to Austro-Hungary, because you got to explain to a lot of people why there's 1.4 million not coming back.
We have November 18th is when the Battle of Somme officially ends. We kind of talked about the casualties and everything like that being the longest battle. So, I mean, at least putting a cap on that one. That had to feel good about being like, finally.
I think it ends... Oh, yeah. So... The Battle of the Somme didn't end in a decisive victory. It didn't end because people were just tired of fighting. It didn't end because they just called it a draw. It ended because the battlefield had turned into such a rainy, slushy mud pit that they just couldn't do anything on it anymore. Like, that was the ending. There wasn't anything decisive. They're just like, can you fight on this?
That's not mud, Chucko.
Yeah.
Can you... I'm just trying to think on a scale for that many people dead.
What you'd have to have? What you'd have to get out of it?
Like the amount of bodies that are probably still in those battlefields that had just been rolled over, turned over in the mud, pulverized by artillery firing to where body parts just sunk into it. Just the insane graveyard that place is still to this day.
Well, and for good reason, because for the 600,000 casualties lost on the British side and the 450,000 casualties lost on the German side, the Allies called it a win because they took 10 miles. They took 16 kilometers of land. They lost that many people to gain 16 kilometers or 10 miles of land. Didn't take any big structures, didn't take any towns, anything like that. You just advanced your front 10 miles.
You just pushed the line.
Jesus Christ. And I think this was the one where we were talking about doing the math on. I think we decided if you laid, and this is going to be wrong because I don't remember the exact math, if each one of these guys was 5 feet tall, again, conservative side, and you lined them up.
5.5 actually was the average for the British soldiers.
5.5?
Yeah, like 140 pounds and 5'5". And these guys also, they made the point of being like, they were carrying 60-pound packs.
Jesus.
And they were asked to go over the top and charge through no man's land. Like, you're carrying 60 pounds, so you're carrying a little less than half your body weight. You're also charging under a fucking hail of gunfire.
In the mud.
And through fucking probably knee-deep mud at that point. Like, how did anyone think that this was a logical way to do this?
No, I think we decided head to foot, if you laid out all the losses from this war, if they all died, I mean, there were casualties, but a lot of deaths. If you laid those guys out head to toe, it'd be like 936 miles.
For the Battle of the Somme.
Yeah. In casualties. That's to get 10 miles, and that's the destruction path.
If you're in the U.S., that would be like you'd be driving through multiple states.
Yeah. It's like a third of the way across the country.
And just seeing fucking bodies lined up head to foot.
That's a lot of bodies.
How do you fucking go in there and like try to clean up and identify? And do you not?
I think you don't. I think you identify.
Like, then you have to like that's fucking where you get fucking plagues and diseases and like all that shit. Like that's not even us talking about. I mean, the Spanish flu is going to come into play here in a little bit, but that's just talking about the Spanish flu. That's not to talk about just like diseases in general from basically just the remains of people. I know I keep coming back to this. This is just insanely like boggling to my mind about just like it's almost like a biological warfare in its own right that you're just sitting in a fucking contaminated zone. And you've never seen in your life anything like this. Like people aren't supposed to ever, we're not like designed to have to witness this kind of stuff or go through this stuff. And to say that like people were like shell shocked. And again, this is where, you know, constantly coming back, troops coming back, losing essentially their fucking minds and just being shells of themselves, and doctors being like, well, it's just shell shock. He lost his courage and everything. It's like, motherfucker, no, you can only see so many people blown up.
I'll show you shell shock. Come with me.
Yeah.
Do a day out here and then come back and we'll talk about shell shock.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. The psychological field has come very, very far since then. But to not just take that one step back for a second and be like, oh, you saw some things that no human brain who ever hasn't been to war could ever imagine. Like, maybe this is a little bit more than shell-shocked.
Well, and it is kind of weird that literally on November 18th, Somme ends, and then a month later, December 18th, the Battle of Verdun ends. So we have these two, almost probably the two most massive actual battles or campaigns themselves ending within a month of each other. And you would think that, you know, maybe we've all learned our lesson, millions of casualties, everyone's fucking been hit in the face. No. Shit starts kicking off back home, back in Russia, and you get in the start of 1917, we get the is it? They call it the February and the March Revolution, right?
Yep. Yeah. Before that, maybe it was finding out how many people were lost at the Somme, and they lost 10 miles. 3 days after November 21st, Franz Joseph kicks a bucket. So you lose the Austrian emperor.
Oh, no.
Real bummer that happens. That maybe he saw probably not the loss that was inflicted on the German side, and he ends up checking out. Which I think, if we were accurate with the Franz Ferdinand episode, Franz Joseph dying would have put Franz Ferdinand in the Austro-Hungarian seat.
I don't know if he was technically the heir, because remember he I don't know if you'd consider abdicated, but he decided to forego his status as the heir because he wanted to marry that woman.
No, he took it, but he said that once he died, his children couldn't assume the throne.
Oh, okay, that's right. Okay,
that was the concession that he made. But Franz Joseph is out. We also see changes in French and British leadership. So we're kind of reshuffling the deck to see what's going on.
At this point, you can't blame him. Like, this war is still going on. You've probably had talk back home of people talking up and being like, this thing's going to be over by this date. Like, that was a big thing. No one had ever kind of understood what the scope of this war was going to be. So you had some people being like, it'll be a 6-month thing. It'll be maybe a 12-month thing. And then you had very, very few people that are like, we see this thing being years. And so if you have a populace that is only getting certain information but not seeing things go fucking very well in your favor, they're going to look for a change in management. So yeah, both sides, the allies are switching it up, trying to figure out to get new management to see if this thing can be closed out.
Yeah. 1917, as Chris was just alluding to, some of the powers start to fall. There's a German submarine attack that ramps back up, and they end up sinking an American wheat ship that's traveling from, I believe it was Galveston, Texas. And that, of course, really pisses off America. The next thing that pisses off America is something called the Zimmermann telegram.
Oh, I fucking love this.
The Zimmermann telegram was a completely unencoded telegram sent from the German consulate in Germany to the German consulate in Mexico City.
Intercepted by the British.
Yeah. And I think that they said that it was it a telegram that was accepted, or they had found it after they had raided like a car or something like that.
I can't remember. It was one of the two.
Yeah, but anyways, it falls into their hands.
Why would Germany be talking to Mexico?
Yeah, very weird, huh? Well, you'd be down there talking to Mexico if you're trying to talk Mexico into falling on your not axis, what are we calling them?
Central Power Sword?
Yeah, Central Powers. So if they can talk Mexico into declaring war, that puts a bunch more pressure on America, and if America's getting hot about the wheat ship that just got sunk, they have to deal with Mexico before they can come over to the Eastern Hemisphere.
It's a delaying tactic. Part of that, they were like, hey, if you go to war with the United States, we'll back you up, and when we win this thing, we're going to give you Texas, Arizona, and New Mexico.
You get all the shit that they took from you in the Mexican-American Wars.
Yep. Mexico was like, yeah, I don't think we're going to do that. We're kind of dealing with some shit back home right now.
Well, and we already fought the Mexican-American Wars, and we know how that ended up. We probably don't want to do that again.
You guys are also dealing with a lot of shit over there, and you're saying you're going to come over and help us? Like, how's that going to work?
Pass.
You got to try to... Do you understand where we're at position-wise? Like, you would have to sail very close to the United States. There's this thing called the Caribbean, and if you wanted to get to Mexico, you're going to need to sail into that.
Spain also said that they don't really want any part of it, so if you're going to sail down to South America, they're probably not going to be super pumped that they got some holdings down vacancy. There. Yeah, not a chance. Here.
So, yeah, you're starting to kind of see some desperation tactics. Well, this has a very, very unintended consequence, because after kind of the shit that's been tolerated with sinking ships, when this Zimmermann telegraph is intercepted and brought to the United States by the Brits, we're basically like, yeah, we're not dealing with this shit anymore. And on the 6th of April, the United States declares war on Germany. Important.
The most important word that you just used in there was declares. Because declares doesn't mean they're showing up any fucking time soon.
No. It's just like, let it be known
that
we are not on your side anymore, and that should the opportunity arise, we have already declared our intentions to make war upon you. If it comes to that.
You know those ships that you guys have been paying for materials that we've been sending over that have been getting picked up by the British and you guys aren't even getting? We're just going to stop even trying to send those.
Well,
Come on.
over in the on the eastern side of this conflict, like I kind of mentioned, we get the February and March Revolution in Russia. Now, on the 15th, and we discussed this at length during the Stalin episode, so if you guys want more information, we've already recorded it. It's already out there. Go back and listen to this because this is fascinating shit. The Tsar, Nicholas II, ends up abdicating the monarchy of Russia, and that's done on the 15th of March.
How many years of rule did that family go for?
Romanov had 300 years of rule. By the next day, guess who's already back in Petrograd? Vladimir Lenin.
He's ready to go. He wants to take over.
They see this happening, and this is essentially where the Bolshevik movement takes place and comes into power in Russia.
Yeah, the Bolsheviks start the revolution. There's a kind of like a puppet government that's thrown in that Tsar Nicholas kind of says, okay, you guys can have it.
It's like a representative type government
where
you guys get a say in the matters of government or some shit.
But at the same time, you're just kind of shifting away from this idea. So you will have the Bolshevik Revolution that's coming very soon. The Russian troops just start taking off from the line. Like, I don't blame them. Why would you continue fighting for a guy who just abdicated the throne? Like, he gave up on you. This April is a very, very scary time. And this April is the nastiest April for U-boats ever. They ended up sinking 886,000 tons of Allied shipments. They were sinking an average of 17 ships a day.
They said there was one submarine that ended up sinking 3 ships in the course of like 3 minutes.
Jesus Christ. That is so fast to be losing ships. And this is where we see after April, we start to see the blockade method, or not the blockade method, the transport method that you were talking about.
Yes, the escorts.
Yeah,
yep.
The escorts ramp this right back down. But for April to be scoring this many blows, again, we're not even close to the Allies having control of this at all. It's still such a far off belief.
It's like they gain in one area and then they lose in another area, so they're never able to go ahead and get into the red.
Yeah.
Or wait, into the black, I guess is what you would consider it.
We also have the Battle of Arras that was used as a diversion for the French offensive that was coming. Air war and recon really starts ramping up around this time. This is where we get into the kind of heyday of the dogfights.
April is a bad month for fucking merchant shipping on the U-boat side. It might even be a worse month for essentially the Ally Air Corps or Air Fleet or Air Power and everything because...
Worse for the Germans.
Well, during Bloody April, the losses of aircraft, I think they said that during that month, the Allies, or it might have been the British just in particular, ended up losing like a third or half of their aircraft.
I thought, yeah, but it was the Germans that called it Bloody April, wasn't it? Wasn't it or Ludendorff that called it that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, because they were fucking shooting down so goddamn many of them.
It's so scary to think that the safest place that you could be during World War I in this April was on the ground.
yeah, exactly. Not in the water, not up in the air.
Nah.
They did so much damage, and it's going to take a while for them to kind of rebuild their forces, that on June 13th, they actually launched the first heavy bomber raid on London. So we go from the advent of military aviation, where it's just scouting, then we're putting guns on them. Now, just during this warfare, or during this duration of the war, you now have the development of bombers that are able to go ahead and fly across the English Channel, navigate to London, and bomb London.
Yeah, we're ramping up tech pretty quick at this point. I think they're getting up there and starting to figure out what they can do with airplanes. Unfortunately, unless you're putting a bigger, heavier engine in an airplane to carry bombs, you're going to have to kind of ramp that stuff up to get it figured out. But they figured it out pretty well. This naval offensive that was the French offensive that the Arras battle was the diversion for starts April 16th, again, in the middle of bloody April. The losses immediately start to mount. 183,000 French casualties, 163,000 German casualties. So the amounts are. That's the first one. That's the first board. Yeah. But the casualties have mounted up so much that the French army ends up changing leadership once again because it went so bad.
Sacre bleu!
The Tiger. This is where the Tiger.
Joffre.
Joffre, yeah.
Joseph Joffre.
This is where he gets brought into the fold. We have the Battle of Messines, June 7th, and this is where we get the fix to the trench problem. So the French started tunneling underneath the German trenches. And I don't know how, because you would have to dig down so much further to get under the German
Was there a
trenches.
fucking water table? Do you remember when we were doing the Civil War episode and they did this? The one time when they dug under and planted so much fucking explosive and everything.
Yeah.
They had to have been looking at every other war that had occurred and been like, okay, what war had kind of been similar to this, and been like, I guess entrenched. They did some stuff. Someone had to have come up with the idea. Because, again, they're in contact with the United States. There's probably some people there, and they're like, hey, guess what we did when we were killing each other? We actually dug holes under it and then blew them up. The French were like, all right, we'll try it.
And it worked pretty well. I think they said that the largest explosion, and I don't know how far down the actual tunnel was, they said that it left a 30-foot crater in the ground.
Yeah.
That was how much explosive they used to blow up these German lines.
Regardless of how many times you do that, too, that's one of those things that just has to even more so fuck with the Germans psychologically. Because you're sitting there and you're like, where did that come from? And word's going to finally get around and be like, it was an explosion underneath them. Like, they dug underneath the trench. And the entire time now you're thinking, every fucking sound you hear, everything you think you feel underground, you're like, are they fucking, is there a bomb? Are they planting stuff under us?
Well, and to get deep enough, too, you would have to, because you'd have to dig it deep enough to where their trenches wouldn't collapse down into that tunnel.
Yeah.
So you'd have to be pretty far under the earth to get to that. We see the new Russian government that tries to mount the June 1st offensive and loses pretty much immediately, and that was the last really try on the Eastern Front. After that, the Bolshevik Revolution kind of starts to set in, and we see the change in hands.
They're
and
kind of focusing inward
on
what they're trying to do.
But I got to think that at this point, the Allies had to have been looking good to everybody else. Because in between July and August, China, Brazil, Siam, and Liberia all declare war on Germany.
Here's the thing, too, is I don't know what stake they had in it. I mean, I can see it to a degree, and I'm sure that there's things that we don't understand about international relations.
Yeah.
But I think the simple fact that throughout the course of this, although it's been slow, pretty much everybody that's been joining up, with the exception of like maybe fucking Bulgaria, has kind of been coming over to the side of the Allies. And when people are noticing a trend, especially, and at the beginning of this, kind of going back a little bit to the United States declaring war, when the
that could have helped them want to do it too, huh?
Yeah. So when the United States declared war, the U.S. wasn't what it is currently militarily. We had a military force that was basically intended for defense and kind of handling like smaller shit and stuff we had fought before, Native Americans, things like that. So you have, it's true.
Yeah.
So you only have a standing army of currently, I think they said it was a little under 150,000. And at this point, when we're talking to the Allies over in Europe, they're like, you've already been sending us stuff. Yeah, we want the stuff that you're sending us, but we need fucking men. And they asked for something like, we need 1 million men. So basically, this is where you also get conscription happening in the United States to build up this army. Well, this isn't like World War II, where when they start signing everyone up after Pearl Harbor, it's like, okay, we're not going to do our big European offensive until 4 years later in 1944.
Yeah.
You're training, because this is in 1917 when you're declaring war. You're getting people over there as quickly as possible. You get people over there by June 25th. And that's not the entire AEF, the American Expeditionary Force, but you have U.S. troops landing in France on June 25th.
Yeah, but they don't see battle for like another year almost.
I know they don't, but what I'm saying is from the time you declare war,
Yeah.
you have your standing army which you can send because they're prepared for war.
But
They
it's
said,
not a
though,
million people.
but you're needing to then start training from that point on enough people to where by the end of the war, there's, I think they said, 2 million American troops over there.
Yeah.
So even, and we're in 1917 at this point, and this war is going to end in 1918.
Yeah, we're kind of right nipping on the heels of.
But militarily, we weren't a powerhouse like we were. As soon as this war ends, yes, that's the spot that we do take, but it's also for the simple fact that after we were done fighting there, we went back to a country that had taken the top spot for economic power, no infrastructure damage. We've done all of this fucking innovation for what's worked over there. We get to design our military and build it essentially from scratch in a way that's going to be the most effective from learning all those lessons about the new modern way of fighting a war. So it puts us, and we've just trained to a degree 2 million soldiers. So we now know we can possibly have either a larger standing army or at the very minimum, a larger reserve army.
And yeah, when World War II kicks off, we're going to get cold feet. And we're not going to jump in right away until we're finally pushed to our limit.
Well, it worked for us the first time.
Yeah,
right?
true.
Yeah.
Okay. That does make sense.
God knows what would happen if we were to join at the beginning of the war and maybe try to end it a little earlier before a ton of the atrocities were committed. No.
It could have saved a few people, I guess. July, though, we get our boy TE. TE and the Arabs push into the Ottoman port of Aqaba. November 2nd, this is where we see the real fuck up come of this whole thing. November 2nd, excuse me, I'm so sick of it I had to cough. The Balfour Declaration comes out from Britain, and it outlines a permanent physical home for the Jewish people in Palestine. So the lands that you were promising the Arabs, if they help fight with you on that side, is then sort of given to the Jews in this weird declaration that you're making once you win and take over.
Oh, you weren't supposed to find out about that.
Yeah, maybe this declaration got intercepted too or something. Who the fuck
This is where,
knows?
if you've listened to the Lawrence of Arabia episode, this is where you get a ton of the confliction with him feeling a huge pull between essentially these people that he feels he has more in common with and he's been spending time with, and this essentially empire that's been his home for the rest of his life. And he sees he's being told one thing, that he's supposed to be helping them. He's trying to help them as best he can. He's advising them even to be like, watch out for these slimy motherfuckers. They're probably drawing something up in the fine print to try to fuck you over later. So if you get to these places first, then you'll have a little bit more of a bargaining chip.
Plant your flag.
Jumping back real quick to August, just because I like to mention it that they're not doing nothing. China on the 14th decides to declare war on Germany.
Yeah, that was China, Brazil, Siam, and Liberia.
Oh yeah, okay. I forgot you said China.
But it was only like 10,000 men that they initially promised over there, which 10,000 men ain't nothing.
You still get your name on. You still get your grade.
You get your name on that trophy when it comes home. What do we have? December. Actually, we'll go. November 20th, we had the Battle of Cambrai, which is the first major tank assault in history. 400 tanks assault the German lines. It worked fairly well for a while until they started, getting entangled in this German barbed wire and started breaking down. The Germans then breached the tanks and summarily killed everybody that was inside. But
we're still working out the kinks.
Yeah, and like you were talking about, though, once they get a hold of these, they can start reverse engineering these, just like we reverse engineered that interrupter gear to figure out how to build yours better to make some more sense of it.
Yeah.
December 11th, the Ottomans finally lose Jerusalem, which was under their Ottoman rule for 400 years.
Yeah.
So, all those crusades, all those efforts that all those English folks made killing those Arabs in Jerusalem, and the Ottomans had swung in there and taken control of it and held it for 400 years afterwards.
And then England takes it back.
Yep, and then England finally gets it back.
In the cyclical crusade fashion, it's England that ends up taking it back.
So crazy. I wonder if they called that the Last Crusade.
Oh my God.
It would...
That had Indiana Jones and his father not gone into that area. Before that was the Last Crusade, because then that technically was
should have been the Last Crusade. Damn. So, December 15th, Lenin and Russia decide to sign the armistice with the Central Powers. This new Bolshevik government doesn't want to be a part of this war. Can't say I blame them. Can't say I don't blame them.
They're still dealing with a ton of shit trying to consolidate power.
Yeah, they got kind of bigger fish to fry, and at that point, I don't think they were really concerned about the Central Powers taking any more. They make some concessions. They give up a little bit of land. They still get to keep a shitload of land because they're Russia, and there's just a shitload of land there.
I wonder if that somehow set a little bit of the friendly terms that they were on leading into World War II that kind of led to them creating the...
Could have been. Yeah, some of those...
The Ribbentrop Pact or whatever it was. I can't remember the full name.
That kind of quiet alliance that they had before things turned very, very bad.
Well, this means that anyone that was fighting over on the Eastern Front can now turn and focus their attention west.
Yeah, dude. So that treaty ends up officially happening, I believe, March 3rd, 1918 was when it was officially signed, but they're out. Everybody's headed back west. 1918, the German spring offensive is like the last shot that Germany feels that they have to push into the west and try to win. And if they don't get that win, there's a great chance the Americans are coming, and if they lose out on that, they drop immediately. During this time, Woodrow Wilson announces this 14-point plan, this pie-in-the-sky idea for how he thinks that Europe and the world needs to run after that. This is where he makes the first mention of the League of Nations. There's a bunch of other concessions as far as like who, or not concessions, but declarations of like who should get what's going to be created.
Everyone is just like, pump the brakes, Woodrow. Just send us your troops. That's all we need right now. We don't need to be told how to handle our shit in business after this whole thing's over.
Yeah, we don't really need your diplomatic beliefs here, buddy. Let's win this, and then maybe we'll negotiate.
Well, on the 23rd, during that offensive, they got so close that they were able to launch an artillery attack on Paris.
Really?
Yeah.
Damn. That's crazy close to be able to get that. How far did artillery shells go back then?
I mean, miles.
Yeah, but still, that's...
I mean, you got to be within sight, I would imagine, to be able to see where they're hitting.
Yeah, you can see the, what's the big thing in Paris?
Eiffel Tower.
Eiffel Tower, yeah.
It wasn't built at that time, was it?
1893.
Oh,
wasn't that the World's Fair?
Okay, there you go.
Yeah. So 1918, the Allies win back their air superiority, but during that time, the German operation Michel on March 21st proves to be effective until the until the Australian and British troops show up to stall that movement. That was kind of like the writing was on the wall. The air superiority getting back to it. The Red Baron, Manfred von Richthofen, gets shot down April 21st. The man had 80 victories.
Yeah.
He was buried by the Allies with full military
honors. Yep.
So again, I think we had that talk during maybe the SOE when it was one of the spies that was given full honors and then shot in the head instead of gassed or hung.
There was still some form of chivalry.
Yeah, like this dude, he killed 80 of our guys, but at the same time...
God damn, I hate this motherfucker, but god damn it, do I respect him.
Yeah, exactly. So, the American divisions finally make their appearance. May 27th, 1918. They thwart German advances on the French land. By that time...
We're here to relieve you frog-eating bastards.
Yeah.
Get out of the way.
How funny do you think that would be when the French are like, oh, it's the Americans, and they start coming up and talking, like, no, let's talk, more fighting, go that way.
Do you not see what is going on?
There were American U.S. soldiers in France at that time.
I can't understand you. It sounds like you have peanut butter in your mouth.
They said that weekly they were shipping in about 10,000 U.S. troops were coming in. That's a pretty fast time to refuel and reset everything. The final German offensive that ended up failing cost them 600,000 casualties. It's a lot of casualties.
Pot committed at that point.
Yeah, you got to throw everything at it. During this time, too, the Reichstag was like, ooh, we need to start maybe talking about an armistice. Maybe we give up a little bit. But the Chancellery held so much power that they were like, nah, we're not going to do that. We're in charge of the country now. You guys just handle the internal stuff. We're going to take care of this war. The Battle of Amiens on Amiens?
Amiens.
Yep. Okay. Amiens on August 8th. the British and Australian, Canadian, and French troops just fuck up the Germans.
This starts what's called the 100-day offensive, and basically this is called that because it did take place over 100 days, but this offensive is effectively what ended the war. The offensive, I can't fucking talk.
You got that French in your voice again.
I know, right? The offensive ends with the surrender, or basically the armistice with Germany. So this is the beginning, the 100-day stretch to the end.
Yeah. This first day, this Amin battle, is called the Black Day of the German army because they just lost so many soldiers. Like Chris said, the 100-day offensive starts. It sends the Germans into a full retreat. Bulgaria signs an armistice in September. October 4th, Germany reaches out for an armistice. Not happening. Wilson requires full withdrawal, and the Kaiser abdicate the throne.
What had happened is during that 100-day offensive, they had been pushing them back so much that they pushed them back to this thing called the Hindenburg Line. Europe loves these fucking defensive lines. You got the Siegfried Line. You got the what was the one over in France? Maginot Line.
The Maginot.
You got the fucking...
Maginot is French.
The Maginot was French, but I'm saying Europe just loves their fucking defensive lines.
Yeah, there was the one in Italy that they had to cross that had the monastery on it.
Yeah. So the Hindenburg Line, the Allies eventually break through. So this is kind of like the last defensive line.
It was aptly named because it had a very similar fate to another Hindenburg that we talked about.
It caught fire and it fucking collapsed.
So, Austro-Hungary finally falls October 24th. Ottoman Empire signs their armistice October 30th. November 3rd is when Austro-Hungary signs their armistice with the Allies. So, Germany not only gets told what they have to do to get the armistice, but then everybody else just falls one after another. And when you lose everybody else that's in this triple alliance with you, you just run out of bullets in the gun. I mean, what are you going to do? You don't have any more support and troops from Austro-Hungary. The Ottomans have effectively been beaten. Where do you turn?
And at the same time, you feel like everything was going on the right course when you didn't have to fight on the Eastern Front anymore.
Yeah, that should have been a big win for you guys.
Yeah, you're now being able to go ahead and focus just on kind of one area or one direction, but at the same time with the arrival of, and I'm not saying that the Americans came in and they were just like, because we're here, we won this. You are able to just replace people so much faster and be bringing in so many more people. The fucking Germans have lost so many people at this point that there's really, you're putting weapons in hands of pretty much anyone that can hold a weapon.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, whether they know how to pull the trigger or not's on them, but at least they're out there to try to scare them. That's when it turns into less of a war to win, but like just a war to grind out your opponent to the point to where they just can't do anything anymore. So everything is slowly just starting to come to a close. Everybody has signed an armistice. They're out except for Germany. So Germany's the lone guy standing in Europe that's not going to give up until the last bastion. Then we get the last bastion coming pretty quickly. The Kaiser goes ahead and abdicates his throne on November 11th, and the new Weimar Republic is signed. They sign the armistice with the Allies in the very famous train car from our World War II episode in Campagny, I believe, France. This was the same train car that Dolph brings back to Paris to sign
France's surrender. And then subsequently blows the fucking shit out of it.
Yeah, so this is it's a pretty important train car. I'd like to know where the train car is now. Do you think it's in German hands, or do you think it's
destroyed? It got blew up. He completely blew it up.
Oh, he did.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow.
Well, and here's the thing too, and this is gonna kind of, if you guys have gone back and listened to the Hitler episodes or the World War II European theater episode, basically the German public at this point has been led to believe that everything has been going pretty well in their favor. They're not really being given the full report. And so when this happens, this is kind of a shock to the people of Germany because they think that they're actually winning this war. This is what leads to what Hitler ends up playing on, is the knife in the back theory. And the knife in the back theory, I think Ludendorff is also a proponent of this, is that this selection of people that once the Kaiser abdicated his throne and the Weimar Republic came in, they basically were colluding somehow with the Allies, and they signed the armistice when Germany, had they continued to fight, would have won the war. This is where you get this resentment essentially, and what allows Adolf Hitler to essentially make these promises, place blame on individuals, and then build this power base.
Well, we'll talk about it here in a second, but I got some real issues just with how that all goes down. We have the Paris Peace Conference, January 18th, 1919. That creates the League of Nations. The Treaty of Versailles is also signed on the 28th of June. It lays out the punishments for Germany with the terms of surrender. Some of those, reduction in military, makes total sense. Kind of what Woodrow was talking about on a grander scale, except for they were going to use that just against Germany. War reparations become a very big talking point, and I'll run through the rest of them, then we'll kind of go back.
So, real quick before you do that, some countries didn't waste any time. As soon as fucking Germany was done on November 11th, you saw a lot of, and I'm not saying this, they weren't right to do this.
Yeah.
I just love the fact that they fucking did this as soon as Germany surrendered. You had Poland, which proclaimed its sovereignty and independence. Austria was like, we're not with Hungary anymore. Austria declared its like independence. Czechoslovakia also declared it was going to be its own thing. And then we have the creation of Yugoslavia, essentially a collection of Slavic nations.
A southern Slavic grouping of nations.
Yes, exactly. And so you have these countries that basically, as soon as they hear that fucking final knockout bell ring, they're just like, okay, we're our own people. We're our own people too. There's no one to fucking tell us we can't be our own people. We're our own people. So that's why essentially you get these countries that are now on the map. And again, some of them do change. Territories change after World War II as well.
So
but
many conflicts.
You get why these countries are in place and who these countries are going to be, how new they are when World War II breaks out.
Well, and just how much infighting happens just throughout everything. Just along that line, before we circle back, the Austro-Hungarian Empire and the Ottoman Empires are all broken up. That causes future conflict. We'll get into all these civil wars that go on just because they're crazy.
Just power vacuums.
Yeah.
Just anyone and everyone trying to fill these. They see a hole, they're going to fill it.
Mm-hmm. Former German possessions in China were given to Japan. That thoroughly pissed China off, which again causes more conflict when you go back to the Chinese-Japan conflicts that have happened basically since they were both around.
Just stoking that fire.
Since the gods made that happen.
And again, at the same time, it's just token possessions that don't really have a benefit to anybody else. It's just like, we're going to give you these. Just remember them if we need you in the future, that we gave you these.
Well, China's probably like, hey, man, that's on our continent. And they're like, yeah, you only gave up 10,000 of your guys to help us out. Japan actually really pulled their weight.
Japan has some pretty good shit, too.
Yeah.
So we figure if we give them, we're much more likely to get their good shit.
Kind of like them.
An industrious motherfucking nation.
Yeah, they're on an island just like us. We got to get this figured out. So back to these concessions that were made during these terms of surrender. Reduction in military, war reparations, loss of territory, which I think helps Poland become who they are. All other colonies are seized, what they had left. And then there's Article 231. Article 231 is the War Guilt Clause, which lays the whole blame at the feet of Germany. Doing a lot of this research, this all thoroughly pissed me off. You could talk me into the war reparations maybe being a little much, like maybe we should have stretched out their war reparations so it wouldn't have absolutely blown apart their economy, because you still have a place in Germany that has to survive. Mm-hmm. The hyperinflation and everything that goes on is what helps Hitler kind of gain a foothold talking against it. So yeah, the war reparations may have been a little harsh. The loss in territory, I believe it was called the Rhineland. That was kind of their industrial hub.
Yep.
If you're going to put war reparations on a country and then also give away their industrial hub of their country where they make the most of their money, probably not a great idea.
Yeah, not pretty short-sighted.
Yeah, but the sticking point on this one for me is I heard a lot of people saying that Article 231 shouldn't have been a part of it, this war guilt clause. I couldn't disagree with that more, because Germany in all of this may have started with an Archduke of Austro-Hungary being shot and killed by Serbians, by a Serbian extremist group. But Germany was the reason that this all happened when they wrote that blank check to Austro-Hungary. They were the leading cause in this. They were the ones that pushed this whole entire thing. Without Germany's backing of Austro-Hungary, this shit never would have fucking happened.
Well, here's the thing, and I completely agree with you on that. If you're looking at the situation from the get-go, you have Austria-Hungary, who declares war on Serbia. They talk to Germany first, and they say, hey, we're going to go and do this. Will you back us up? Russia declares war on Germany and Austria-Hungary. It could have stayed compartmentalized just between them had Germany not decided to be like, I need to attack France first. So basically, and this is why I'm in full agreement with you on this, is that whenever shit was being done, it's like the war started and Germany saw that, and then basically they took control of it when it was really Austria-Hungary's fight.
Mm-hmm.
And they basically used that as a springboard, as an excuse to try to essentially gain more land, enrich themselves, and everything. They basically stepped out of the box that this thing could have been contained in, and involved way more people and countries than it had to. And for that, being the ringleader means that had this thing been won by the Central Powers, you can guarantee 100% that most of the spoils would have gone to Germany.
Oh, yeah.
Because they would have used the excuse that we were the largest contributor to this, to the win. We lost the most amount of men. We backed up everybody else. They would have used that as the excuse to be the prime recipient of those benefits. That's also on the flip side why you need to fucking take your medicine on this war guilt clause, is because when it went negative, if you were expecting the bulk of the, fucking spoils, then you're also going to go ahead and take the bulk of the responsibility when it doesn't go right. And to sit there and say that that's not fair, be like, this was started and you involved a lot more people than were necessary, that didn't even want to get involved into this, because you were just fucking doing what you wanted. You didn't have to march into Belgium to attack France. You didn't have to commit the war crimes that you committed in Belgium. Like, from the onset, you guys didn't have to use chemical weapons. Like, from the onset, it was just like, Germany was just like, let's take it further, let's take it further, let's take it further. There was never really, it felt like, any time to think about, like, I wonder what repercussions this is going to have if we attack someone that's not currently attacking us.
Actions have consequences, and to not have to live up to those. I understand that it was used in a very quasi-messed up way by Hitler to try to come to power and to take back what he wanted and all that stuff, but if you don't have somebody to pay the piper for what you did, and you don't have to say that it was your fault, I think that there's not a great end to a war like that if you don't have somebody to blame.
Yeah.
And it just...
I hate to say you have to make an example.
Yeah.
But if this war has been... They called it the war to end all wars. It was...
Called it a little early.
Yeah. Such a loss of life, destruction on a scale that had never been imagined, in human history. And they saw this and they said, we're never going to fucking do this again. No one ever wants to be in this position again. So what we have to do is we have to make the punishment for this bad enough that anybody that looks or has a fucking itch to try to do anything remotely close to this will look at that example and say, it's not fucking worth it.
Yeah, and to the tune of losses, I don't really know how they can calculate these numbers, and they could be, I think, maybe on the low end. 9.5 million soldiers died. That's 1 in every 8 that fought in the war. 21 million wounded. So if 9.5 is 1 in every 8, 21 million would have to be like 1 in every 4.
Mm-hmm.
This was shocking. 7 million civilians died. That's a lot of civilians that died that weren't even a part of this war.
Yeah.
And to not have anybody take responsibility for that just seems...
And that's how many things that were genocide for, like, trying to take out entire cultures of people. I think there was a statistic about it was either Somme or Verdun, and this just kind of puts into scope how far-reaching this was. They said that at one point or another, 75% of the French troops that served at one point served in either Verdun or Somme. I'm not saying either or; it's
Yeah.
one of them. I can't remember exactly which one, but to sit there and you are standing with four of your buddies that served in the military with you in France, three of you, based on those odds, would all be able to talk about the same thing and what you saw. You could walk into a room with four strangers that you'd never met before that were in the French army, and you would have instant connection with three of them for what you experienced and what you guys could talk about. It's just like it's nuts, and the loss of life at this point had, it had never been seen on that scale. And what's fucking crazier even than the loss of life is that 20 years from now,
Yeah.
it's going to just be reset and do it all again. And I kind of, one of the last thoughts I had on this is with this many people out of these countries that had been killed, I know it's a huge number. But for some reason, when they say what percentage of their fighting force was lost, and they're only giving numbers that are like 15%, 20%, it's just like, fuck, how many people did you have in your
Yeah.
military and everything like that to where this number is only 15% overall of your fighting force? At the same time, I had a thought about how they would try to replenish troops and everything. Do you think once the war ended, there was in all of these countries of people coming back, Germany, France, Britain, Russia, like a baby boom, where soldiers coming back were getting married, having kids, all that stuff. And by the time that the next war rolls around, Germany has this brand new crop of people that are, 17, 18, 19, 20 years old that they're now bringing in to fight in this new war.
Well, and I think we probably would have seen it had there been another war after World War II, because there was the massive baby boom after World War
Yeah.
II. That's how we got a complete generation in this country. So, but all you're doing when you're going home and fucking after this war is just breeding a new populace to go back
You're
to the
breeding more
same
meat
war.
for the grinder that's going to
Yeah.
come right back around.
Yeah, it's very, very cyclical, and to have to figure out what kind of mindset you would have to be to just feel that you're lucky enough to make it back. And then if you hadn't had a chlorine gas exposure or something like that, to live the next 20-ish years until you see it kicking off again. And you look at your kids, you're like, I didn't know. I'm sorry. I thought I did this so you didn't have to do this again.
Like, how do you justify that when those people that fought 20 years later, those people that were 20 years old are now 40? You almost hope for a point that the people that fought and survived were 30, so they were 50 when the next one rolled around, so they didn't have to fight.
Oh,
There
yeah.
were people that
Yep.
had to fight from a soldier perspective in two wars. I mean, a lot of these guys that we discussed are going to be people that come in to take, in Hitler's party to take high command. Fucking, who's the guy that was the leader of the Wehrmacht? Not the Wehrmacht, the Luftwaffe. There was Goebbels.
Himmler?
Not Himmler. It was the bigger dude that wore like the powder blue suit. Oh, I don't know how I can't think of this guy's name.
That's what struck me so much on the German side, and we were talking about this beforehand. PVH, Paul von Hindenburg and Ludendorff were thick as thieves during this. They were kind of captain and co-captain.
Hermann Goring.
Goering.
He was a pilot during World War One, and he parlayed that experience of being a pilot into commanding the Luftwaffe. So, you have these people that were witnessing firsthand about the loss and that your country lost and everything, and you're going right back in to do it again.
With confidence.
Yeah.
Like that you think that it's going to work this time.
Yeah.
It's just so crazy to me. Yeah, like I said, we were talking about PVH and Ludendorff end up on sort of different sides of World War II, because von Hindenburg is just so fucking old that he's kind of in and out.
I can't do this shit again.
Yeah.
I barely made it through the last one. I can't do this again.
He doesn't want to see it happen, but somehow Ludendorff was this driving force with Hitler to try to make it happen again. It was like Ludendorff maybe didn't get his fill and was young enough to still have that spark to want to try it again.
Had I been the one in charge, it would have been different. This is my chance to prove it.
And von Hindenburg, just like you said, he's like, I'm too old. for this shit. Can we not try this again? Like, I saw everything that happened
Have
before.
we lost the taste in our mouth of this already? It only took 20 years for us to forget. And not even that. They were paying reparations even up faster than that. So they had just got done paying reparations years before, and they were just like, all right, back to war?
Well, yeah, America had to make special concessions for them to break up their war debt to be able to get back on their feet. So, like, they were given plenty of opportunities not to fuck this up again. And von Hindenburg was just so old and along in life where he's like, I'll try, but I don't know.
I think that's my biggest takeaway from this is you look at the loss of life, civilians, military, the fucking places that were destroyed, the destruction caused, and you're just like, what did these people die for if you're just going to turn right around and do this shit again?
Yeah. And lose.
Yeah.
Again.
All right, man. What do you think?
I was on a roller coaster with this one. I thought World War I was going to kind of pale in comparison and be boring compared to World War II. In some facets it is, and the fact that it took us a 2-part episode to lay out World War I when we're going to have, we've already done a Western theater for World War II, Pacific theaters coming up, we're going to have an African theater, and just breaking it down, there's going to be so many different theaters for World War II, but being able to do this in 2 episodes doesn't mean that there's not good information. There's just sort of less information because of the fighting style and how it all went down. Yeah. But it was incredible to do this research and see just kind of like the puberty session of trying to figure out how to fight a war a more effective way. Mm-hmm. Like you were given all these new toys that you had just come up with.
It almost answers the question, like when we're talking about World War II, we talk about like, I think the comparison, I don't want to use the term cooler because I don't want to sound disrespectful.
Yeah.
But World War II is just cooler in the scope of like engineering and like advancement and stuff like that. But if you ever had any questions about like, how did they think of this shit? Like, where did this shit come from? Chances are, if you're looking at things that are happening or being used in World War II, go back to World War I and you get to see those things in their infancy. Mm-hmm. You get to see those things brought to fruition, and it really ties up a lot of the questions that you have about World War II, especially about like, this really answers like the end of it and everything. It does kind of answer the question of like, how could this happen again?
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's like, how could this happen again?
The major factors of World War II is how the advancement was finally mastered and used. Whereas World War I, it's like, well, so many people died because they didn't know how to either defend against it or use it correctly.
Yeah.
Like the loss of life, I don't remember exactly how many were lost in World War II, but they were lost in many different styles compared to how the losses mounted up in World War I.
It was more far-reaching as far as the death, I think,
is
what it was, yeah. Because, like, Russia didn't get marched into, and a large portion of the deaths in World War II took place on the Russian front, on the Eastern Front.
They were the guys.
Yeah, exactly. Russia didn't really get attacked and pushed into Russia at this point like they did in World War II. But, yeah, a lot of episodes you guys can go back and listen to that we made references on this episode. A lot of episodes are going to be coming out of World War I, just for topics that we kind of brushed over that deserve kind of their own day in the sun. But look forward to those. And, again, rate, review, subscribe. We love hearing from you guys. Love the feedback. We're going to keep cranking them out for you. Send us your suggestions.
Thanks for sticking with us through 2-parters. Sometimes we see a little bit of a dip for our second episode, but if you've gone through and listened to it, know that we really appreciate you sticking with us. I know that sometimes the drag of some of these episodes, as far as 4 hours of information on something, feels like a lot, but we have, I think, thoroughly enjoyed doing this and knew that a 2-part episode was going to be necessary because we had to get into some of this stuff. We had to talk about
stuff like this.
Oh, yeah.
All right, guys. Well, thanks again, and we'll catch you on the next one.
Peace.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for joining us for another episode. If you like what you heard, hit that subscribe and like button. Follow us. If you didn't like what you heard, still hit that anyway, because we'll probably cover something in the future that you do like. Please follow us on our social media. Adam, hit them with it.
Our Instagram is historically high pod, historically high pod, and we are on Twitter at historically high. That's historically HI.
All right. And if you guys want to send in any feedback, suggestions, hit us up on those two, or you can even do it on Gmail. It's historicallyhighpodcast@gmail.com. Thanks again.
Peace.